So good evening, everybody. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the launch of the new edition of the book, The Healing Journey, Overcoming the Crisis of Cancer, and to the launch, in a way, of the Healing Journey programme in the UK. My name's Liz Grant. I'm a Healing Journey leader at the present. I'm working with one of the level 4 at the moment. And I'm also a psychosynthesis psychotherapist with a private practice in South London. And I've been involved with some of the family constellation work, which has become part of the healing journey. And my training was at the Psychosynthesis and Education Trust, and it's actually, in fact, through them that I heard about the healing journey. So what we're going to be doing this evening is we're going to be hearing talks from the founder of the Healing Journey programme, Professor Alastair Cunningham, and also from Petra Griffiths, who's introduced the programme into the UK at the Paul Dorrier Cancer Support Centre. So I think there's no more need for any more introduction. So I'd like firstly to introduce Alastair Cunningham, and make sure I get the title right. He's Professor Emeritus at the University of Toronto, and he initiated the programme at Ontario Cancer Institute 30 years ago. So he's conducted a great deal of research into its impact both on anxiety and depression and on people's lives. Alastair's had a fascinating career, including being an immunology researcher, as well as being Professor of Psychiatry in Toronto. He's also given very generously of his time and his expertise to help us set up the Healing Journey programme in the UK. So please give him a very warm welcome to London. And Alastair's going to speak to us for about 30 to 40 minutes.
Yes, I've been told I'll really be stopped if I go on, which I sometimes do. Thank you, Liz, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Very delighted to be here. Very pleased to be here along with my wife Margaret and daughter Anne, who are at the back. We're having a bit of a holiday at the same time. The main reason for being here, of course, as was said, is because of the launch of this book, Timeless Classic. It's being updated for a UK audience. I'm not quite sure if something's been left out that's not suitable for this population. Anyway, Petra and Frances Miller, her associate, have done a great job, and of course we're delighted over in Canada that you're finding this useful, the program and the book, and we'll do anything we can to help. So I guess the other things that in introducing me are worth knowing is I am a cancer patient myself, or I was 20-some years ago. I was an immunologist. I became a psychologist, not a psychiatrist, I hasten to say. Stanley, I'm a psychologist. And I'm basically a researcher, and my work in the last 30 or so years since I made the switch from laboratory science to psychology has been developing a program, which we call the Healing Journey. It surely didn't arise full-fledged 30 years ago. It's gradually grown, and is still growing, as a matter of fact, and has reached the stage that I'll describe now. I wanted to start with this principle that's really been known for at least 3,000 years in human history, but hasn't quite reached our general materialistic society yet, and that is that suffering is caused not by the events themselves, but by a reaction to them. I think it was Epictetus or somebody like that in ancient Greece that said that, and it's been known elsewhere. So imagine this rather gloomy scenario. Imagine that you've got a lump somewhere or a pain somewhere, and you're not particularly worried about it. You go to your doctor. After waiting an hour in the waiting room, you're admitted, and 5 minutes later you come out and your life is shattered because you've had a diagnosis of incurable cancer. That happens to people, doesn't it? And what does that tell us? It tells us that it's not the cancer that's the problem. It's our reaction to the knowledge of there being cancer, the diagnosis, and its implications that is causing our suffering. And of course it does cause enormous suffering. There can be a sudden spiralling into depression, anxiety, hopelessness, and all the rest of it. And in fact that cancer would have been there for months certainly, and probably for years. You were living a normal life until suddenly somebody got in there and said, I'm sorry, you've got cancer and we think you have about 6 months to live. So this is the point at which that begins to happen, and our appraisal causes the suffering. And you'll see why I'm emphasising that, because healing in its broadest sense is the relief of suffering. We've gotten to thinking of healing as only the removal of the cause, the external cause. Like in the case of cancer, just cut it out, doctor, and all will be fine. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Healing can be accomplished not only by such external means, which are great when they work, but also by internal means, by readjustment of our whole reaction to the situation. Again, nothing new in this. Again, thousands of years human history. Go back to Gautama Buddha. He'll tell you all suffering is caused by desire for things to be different. And he laid out a route to the overcoming of suffering. So you could call this self-directed healing, what we can do within ourselves to complement, not of course to replace, but to complement what our excellent medical system will do by working from the outside. And I've just listed 3 things. To alleviate suffering by taking some control over how the mind reacts to the existence of the disease. To deal with the existential crisis. My life all of a sudden looks like it's going to be cut short. I'm not ready to go. A very painful realisation. There are things that we can do to ease the suffering that can cause. And where possible, this is a controversial, and I hope I'll have time towards the end to address this a little, because I know a lot of people are interested in it, to affect the actual physical progression of the disease by changes in one's mental state. Yeah, the first point there. This is a learning process now. Most of us need a teacher. I certainly did. A lot of teachers. Most of us are not, fully fledged mind-body, mind-spirit control experts. We need to be around people with more experience. It's a progressive process, like any educational process. It's not a matter of learning some quick fix trick in a weekend or listening to some motivational speaker. It's a gradual, slow process of learning new things about yourself, how you relate to your world, and to your disease, if you have one, and how you can change that. So it's progressive, yeah. Each step builds on the one before. Like I often say to our patients, this is like learning a new language. It requires about that amount of effort if you want to be fluent. So you don't just come here and listen to someone, go home and you practice. And of course that's the main limitation of this sort of work. Not everyone wants to do that. Not so much because they can't. I have great confidence that people can put effort into things they see the value of, most people, but I think it's not very familiar to us yet in our culture, that we can learn to take some responsibility for our own mental state and for our own health generally. So I've shown that self-healing as a series of steps here. You'll see how this maps onto our program in a moment. Do nothing would still be the norm, I guess, unfortunately. Support, being in a support group and finding supportive friends to whom you can authentically relay how you're feeling. Very important, of course. Then the healing journey program that I'll come to starts about here. Of course, we advocate healthy lifestyle, healthy diet. Exercise, very interesting one, by the way, because until recently the physicians would have said exercise can't affect your cancer. Well, now we know that's not true. There's some good studies showing that breast cancer and colon cancer, the recurrence rate of those 2 diseases can be cut in half by regular daily exercise. So if you have that diagnosis, it would be foolish not to do that. Diet is much more controversial still. We start with basic coping skills, relaxation, imagery, thought monitoring, so on. I'll come to it. Then that's only a beginning. Then we move, for those people who are motivated enough to do some work, we do work on understanding and changing our regular thinking patterns. You find when you look into your regular thinking patterns, unless you're very unusual, that most of your thoughts are judgmental. Nothing's ever quite right. Have you noticed that? If you haven't done it before, it's rather horrifying if you look honestly. And it's sometimes quite subtle things, but nothing is ever quite the way I want it to be. Nobody else is quite right. They're getting in my way. They're not doing what I need. And that, of course, leads to a great deal of general unhappiness, let alone ill health and stress. So we work on that. We work on guilt. We work on our tendency to project, that is to blame people outside. And then, having done a bit of that, I think of it as clearing of the underbrush, then we're ready to move into the spiritual search, meaning not religious, but the big existential questions. Is there something more? Is the mind confined to the body? Philosophers and others have wrestled with this for centuries. There's a lot you can do to find out for yourself.